All right, so we've already learned about one type of looping control structure, the while loop. Let's jump into another type of looping control structure called the for loop, which gives us many of the same abilities, but changes the syntax and how we write it a little bit differently. Let's get into it. So recall, this is the for loop. So let's say, for example, that I want a simple program that can print out all of the digits from 1 to 10. Let's think about how we would do that in a while loop. So in a while loop, I would create an integer first, and I would call my int, let's call it int num. And if I want to print from the numbers 1 to 10, I'll start with integer at 1, with our num at 1, and I'll create a while loop. And with this while loop, I am going to check that my num is less than or equal to 10, right? Because I want to be able to get to 10, so I need to make sure that it's equal to 10. And then I'm going to go ahead and say out.println, and I'll go ahead and print num, and I'll concatenate a little space on it so that it spaces out all of the numbers. And then I will increment num. And this will print out, if we do the code trace, this will print out all of the numbers from 1 to 10. Okay, now this is a perfectly fine way to do it, but there is another tool, the for loop, that helps us compress some of this into a little bit cleaner and neater set of information. So if you'll notice here, there are 3 pieces of information that are going to be kind of standard across while loops that do this type of information or this type of progression, this counting. And we do this a lot. So the for loop takes these 3 pieces of information and puts it in one line. So the first thing it does is it creates our new integer. And we generally write things like this. So to solve the same problem, we're going to write a keyword for, that's a reserved word in Java. And we're going to say, just as we did up there, we're going to say int num. So we're creating a new integer num, and we're going to set it equal to a number. In this case, set it equal to 1. And I'm going to check in my next statement, and this is important, there's a semicolon after that one, just like we did with that statement up above. And then I'm going to do my check. So if you think of the 3 lines vertically, we're now putting them across horizontally. So now I'm going to check that num is less than or equal to 10. And I'm going to put a semicolon, just as if it's its own statement on its own line. And then I'm going to increment num. And this does these 3 things in the same order that we did in our while loop. The only difference is that num is not persistent. So in this case, num will get garbage collected. Garbage collected. That's the main difference in the way that these operate. So in our first example with a while loop, num will persist after we finish our while loop. In this case with the for loop, num will not persist after the end of the for loop. So that's an important distinction between using them. But inside, I can do the same thing. I can simply say out.println, and I can say num plus a space. And the increment of num will happen after all of this code runs. So num happens after, or basically right before we hit this last curly brace at the end. And each one of these 3 spaces can be almost any Java statement. So we can have our decrement here. We can do complex Boolean expressions in the middle here. This doesn't actually have to be an integer. In fact, this statement doesn't have to be here at all. We could move integer num outside of our for loop and check it here, just as we would with a while loop, and still have the incrementing done here. Or we could leave this blank and we could do incrementing somewhere inside. But this allows us the ability to smash all of those lines together, and instead of having 4 lines of code to do a simple counting algorithm, we can do it in just 2, which is really nice and really handy. Okay, next thing we are going to do is we are going to look at manipulating these with strings and doing some fun things with for loops and indexes in strings. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.